The alarm climbing through the command deck did not match anything I had been trained to fear, and that was the first thing that told me the day had already gone wrong. I had spent 11 years inside the listening halls of the Imperium, and I knew every warning tone the great machines could make. I knew the slow pulse that meant a star had shifted in its cradle. I knew the bright triple note that meant a trade lane had broken. This sound was none of those. It was a flat, steady ring, the kind the old builders had made for a moment they hoped would never come, and the board beneath my hands was telling me why. A Terran vessel had crossed the frontier. That alone would have been strange. What made my breath go shallow and my thoughts turn cold was the second line of the report. The crossing had happened 9 days earlier. 9 days. I read it twice, then a third time, because 9 days ago, the nearest Terran ship had been charted at the far edge of the Quiet Reach, a journey our fastest couriers measured in seasons, not days. The distance could not be argued with. The time could not be argued with. And yet both sat there on the board, side by side, refusing to make sense. My name is Vren, and on that morning I was the only person in the command of the frontier station who was not surprised. I was afraid, which is a different thing, but I was not surprised. I had written the warning. I had written it carefully, with every figure checked and every claim sourced, and I had sent it up the chain to people who outranked me by more steps than I could count. I had told them, in the plainest words the Imperium would let me use, that the small blue world at the edge of the Quiet Reach was not what our models said it was. I had told them to leave it alone. They had read my report the way you read a weather note for a region you will never visit, and then they had filed it, and then they had done the one thing I had begged them not to do. The corridor outside my station was already filling with movement. Officers in pale command gray hurried past, their crests low, their voices clipped. I joined the flow toward the great hall where the frontier fleet was directed, and as I walked, I let myself remember how this had started, because I knew that very soon, someone with power would demand that I explain it, and I wanted the memory clean. It had started with a survey. The Imperium is old, older than most of the species inside it can properly imagine, and it grows the way old things grow, slowly and without much thought, sending its survey fleets out along the dark lanes to find what is worth taking. 3 seasons ago, one of those fleets, under an overseer named Taln, had come upon a Terran ship near the frontier. The ship was called the Lodestar. It was not a warship. By every reading we took, it was a vessel of study, sent out to look at stars and dust and the cold spaces between, and it carried a small crew who had clearly not expected to meet anyone at all. Overseer Taln had done what overseers do. He had seen a young species, a soft target, a thing to be absorbed, and he had taken the ship. He had taken its crew. He had sent word back to the inner worlds that a new client people had been found, primitive and isolated, ripe for the Imperium's gentle and total embrace. He had expected, I am sure, a small reward, and a small note in the long record of his service. He had not read my warning, because my warning had not yet been written. By the time it was, the Lodestar's crew were already held in the frontier outpost called Hollow Spire, and Taln was already telling everyone who would listen that the matter was settled. I had spent the years before that day doing the quiet work that no one thanks you for. I had listened to the Terrans, not their ships, which were few, but their signals, which were many. A world like theirs leaks light and sound into the dark for a long time before it ever builds a vessel worth noticing, and I had gathered those leaks for years and learned to read them. I had watched their stories. I had watched the way they argued and the way they made peace. I had watched a species that fought itself bitterly, and then, again and again, chose to stop, to rebuild, to reach back out across the very lines it had drawn in anger. I had watched them lose and refuse to stay lost. And somewhere in all that watching, a cold understanding had settled in me that I could not shake. The Imperium's models sorted young species into simple shapes. There were the ones who knelt at the first show of strength. There were the ones who broke and scattered. There were the rare ones who fought and were crushed. The models were built on thousands of contacts across an age of expansion, and they were almost always right. But the Terrans did not fit any of the shapes. When I fed their history into the model gave me an answer, and then, quietly, in the part of the report that no one ever reads, it warned that its own confidence was low. The Terrans did the wrong things. They unified under pressure instead of breaking. They learned from those who beat them, and then surpassed them with frightening speed. And they did one thing that none of the kneeling species ever did. One thing that the model had no column for at all. They remembered. They held a wrong close and carried it and built around it, and they did not let it go until it was answered. So I had written my warning. Leave the blue world alone, I had said. Do not take its ships. Do not hold its people. This is not a species that will be absorbed. This is a species that will come for what is theirs, and it will come faster than you believe it can. And when it arrives, you will wish you had never seen it. I had used softer words than that, because the Imperium does not reward a junior analyst for speaking plainly to overseers. But that was the shape of it, and the warning had gone up the chain, and the chain had shrugged. Now I stood at the entrance to the great hall, and the steady ring of the alarm was louder here, and the board on the far wall showed me the thing I had been afraid of for 3 seasons. A single Terran ship had appeared at the frontier. One vessel. It hung in the dark a short distance out from Hollow Spire, where the Lodestar's crew were still held, and it was not firing, and it was not running, and it was not doing anything at all that our weapons could answer. It simply waited, and the station's sensors crawled over its hull and came back with numbers that the analysts on the floor did not like. High Marshal Edrock stood at the center of the hall, tall and gray and certain, the way the highest officers are always certain. He had commanded fleets in 3 border conflicts, and he had never lost, and the long habit of winning had worn a groove in him that he could no longer step out of. He was listening to a report from the floor, and his crest barely moved, and when the report ended, he made a sound that I had heard powerful people make my whole life. It was the sound of a person deciding that a problem was small. "One ship," he said. "They sent 1 ship." A junior officer near him spoke carefully. "Marshal, the vessel reached the frontier in 9 days, from a charted position that should require a full season of travel. We do not understand how." "Then we will ask it how, after we have taken it," Edrock said. "Bring the outpost defenses to readiness. If the Terrans want their crew returned, they may negotiate from a position of weakness, as is proper. Send the demand." I should have stayed quiet. A wise analyst stays quiet in a room full of marshals. But I had written the warning, and I had carried the cold understanding for 3 seasons, and I could feel the moment turning under us like a deck in a storm. "Marshal," I said, and the hall noticed me, which is never a comfortable thing. "I am Vren, of the listening halls. I filed an assessment of this species. With respect, the 1 ship is not a sign of weakness. It is a message. They are telling us that 1 ship is all they believe they need." Edrock looked at me, the way you look at a tool that has spoken out of turn. "And you believe that?" "I believe we should learn why they believe it," I said, "before we do anything we cannot take back." For a moment, the hall was very quiet, and I thought he might listen. Then a new report came up from the floor, and everything we thought we knew turned over. The single Terran ship had moved, not toward us, not toward the outpost, but in a slow, deliberate circle, and as it moved, Hollow Spire's outer sensors began to fail. Not break, fail. One by one, the long eyes of the station went dark, in an order that looked almost gentle, as if a hand were drawing a curtain across our sight. The defense grid that ringed the outpost, the grid that had stood ready for an age and had never once failed, reported that it could no longer find its own targets. The weapons were there, the power was there, but the systems that aimed them had simply stopped agreeing on where anything was, and no one on the floor could say why. It took 9 breaths. I counted them. In 9 breaths, a single, unarmed-looking Terran vessel reached across the dark and switched off the eyes and the aim of a fortress that the Imperium had trusted for longer than the Terrans had been building ships, and it did it without firing a shot, which was somehow far worse than if it had. The hall, which had been certain, became something else. I watched the certainty drain out of the officers on the floor and pool somewhere none of us could reach. High Marshal Edrock did not move, but his crest, for the first time, dropped a finger's width, and in a being like him that was the same as another person screaming. Then the message came. It arrived on every channel the station kept, and on several it did not officially have, which meant the Terrans knew about channels we thought were secret. It came in clean, calm Imperial speech, in our own tongue, spoken without a single error, by a voice that did not rush, and did not threaten, and did not waver. A woman's voice, level and unhurried. The voice of someone who has already decided how a thing will end, and is simply waiting for you to catch up. "This is Commander Eleanor Crane, of the Terran vessel Resolute," the voice said. "3 seasons ago, you took a ship of ours called the Lodestar, and you took the people aboard her, and you are holding them at this station. We have come to bring them home. We have not harmed your sensors. We have only shown you that we could. Return our people, unharmed, and we will leave the way we came. That is the whole of our request. You have until your station's next full turn to answer. We hope you will choose well. We have read what happens when an old power decides that a young one is small, and we would prefer to write a different story with you. The choice is yours." The message ended. The hall was silent, and into that silence, with the steady ring of the alarm still climbing the walls, High Marshal Edrock turned slowly and looked at me, and I saw in his face the thing I had dreaded most of all. It was not anger. Anger I could have managed. It was the first thin edge of fear, in a being who had never in his long life had cause to feel it, and it was looking to me to tell it that everything would be fine. I could not tell him that. I had written the warning, and the warning had come true, and the only thing I could think, as the station's turn began to count down toward an answer no one in the hall knew how to give, was that we had spent 3 seasons telling ourselves a comfortable story, and the people who had actually been listening were the ones now waiting in the dark, asking, with terrible patience, for the thing we had taken to be returned. I stepped forward into the center of the hall, where the highest officers stood, and I did the most dangerous thing an analyst can do. I told them the truth they did not want. "You have until the turn ends," I said. "I would spend it deciding how to give the crew back, not how to keep them. Everything in my assessment said this would happen. Everything I am seeing now says it is worse than my assessment. That ship reached us in 9 days. We still do not know how. Whatever lets them do that is sitting out there in the dark, waiting. And it has been kind so far. I would not test how long the kindness lasts." "You ask me to surrender to a single vessel," Edrock said, and his voice was very quiet. "I ask you to return what was taken," I said. "It was never ours. The taking was the mistake. Everything after is just the cost of the mistake growing." The marshal did not answer at once. Around us the floor came alive again, officers scrambling to restore the blinded sensors, to find some advantage, to make the fear into a plan. And I stood in the center of it all and watched the turn count down, and I thought of the Terran commander's voice, level and unhurried, and of the words she had chosen. We have read what happens when an old power decides that a young one is small. They had read it. They had studied us the way I had studied them. And the difference, the terrible difference, was that they had believed what they read, and we had not. The first answer the Imperium gave was not the right one. I knew it would not be, because the Imperium is old, and old things do not bend on the first push. But I had said my piece, and the marshal had heard it, and somewhere far above us, the chain of command was waking to a problem it could not file and forget. The turn counted down. The Resolute waited in the dark. And I, who had written the warning that no one read, stood in a hall full of the most powerful people on the frontier, and understood, with a clarity that hollowed me out, that the warning had only been the beginning. The hardest part was not yet here. The Terrans were coming, and one ship was only the door opening. I had spent 3 seasons trying to make the Imperium see what I saw. Now the Imperium was going to see it whether it wanted to or not. And I was going to have to stand in the middle of that seeing, and try, against every instinct of an empire that had never lost, to keep the cost from growing past the point where anyone could pay it. The turn ended. The marshal opened his mouth to give his answer, and out in the dark, the Resolute began, very slowly, to move. The marshal's answer, when it came, was the answer of an empire that had never been told no. He did not order the crew released. He did not, to his small credit, order the Resolute destroyed, because the floor had made it plain that we no longer had reliable aim. Instead, he chose the middle path that powerful beings always reach for when they are afraid and will not say so. He offered to talk. The reply went out under his seal, and it was a careful piece of work. It thanked the Terrans for their patience. It expressed regret for any confusion. It explained, in the long and gracious manner of the Imperium, that the crew of the Lodestar were guests of the station, that their status was a matter for proper discussion, and that the Imperium would be pleased to open negotiations regarding their eventual return, once certain matters of protocol and recompense had been settled. It was, beneath the soft words, a demand. Pay us, acknowledge us, bow, even a little, and we will give back what we took, in time, on our terms. I knew it was the wrong answer before it finished sending, because I had read 3 years of Terran history, and I had never once seen them respond well to being asked to bow for the return of their own. The Resolute's reply was not in words. The slow circle the ship had been tracing tightened, and as it tightened, the inner ring of Hollow Spire's defenses went the way of the outer ring. Not destroyed, switched off, the heavy weapons that guarded the docking bays, the close batteries that no enemy had ever come near enough to threaten, all of them reported, one after another, that they could no longer find a target, could no longer trust their own aim, could no longer be sure of anything at all. It happened in the same gentle order as before, a curtain drawn closed, and it ended with the station's entire defensive grid sitting dark and useless, while its power cells hummed at full charge, ready to fire at nothing, in every direction. The floor of the great hall went very quiet. An officer near me whispered a number to herself, the number of weapons the station mounted, the number that had taken an age to build and had now been made into ornaments in the space of a few breaths, and she could not seem to stop saying it. Then the second message came, and it was Commander Crane again, and her voice was exactly as level as before, which somehow made my crest crawl. "You offered to negotiate the return of our people," she said. "I want to be clear, so there is no confusion later. The people of the Lodestar are not a matter for negotiation. They are ours, and they were taken, and they are coming home. The only thing open for discussion is whether you hand them over yourselves, with dignity, or whether we come and collect them. I would strongly prefer the first. I think you would as well. To help you decide, I am going to tell you some things, so you understand the position you are in." And then she told us things she should not have known. She named the crew of the Lodestar, all of them, in order, by name, and she said where each of them was held within Hollow Spire, which level, which section, which cell. She named the medical readings of 2 of them who had fallen ill in our holding, readings that existed only on the station's own internal records, records that were not connected to anything that should have reached the dark. She named the officer in charge of their holding and the rotation of his guards. She named the access code to the holding level, the current one, the one that had been changed only the day before. She read it out, slowly, one symbol at a time, in our own tongue, and with every symbol the silence in the great hall grew heavier, because every symbol was correct. She was not guessing, she was reading our station to us from the inside, as easily as I read a child's first signal, and she was doing it to make a single point land with the full weight it deserved. "We have no secrets from you," the point said. "There is no plan you can make that we cannot already see. There is no advantage you are holding that we have not already taken. We are not asking because we need to. We are asking because we would rather not take. I have told you these things," Crane finished, "so that you do not waste the next turn looking for a clever way out of this. There is no clever way out. There is only the choice between a good ending and a worse one. Your people will tell you to find the clever way. They always do. I am asking you, directly, not to listen to them. Return our crew. Let us all go home. You have one more turn." The channel closed. High Marshal Edrock stood in the center of the hall, and for a long moment he did nothing at all. Around him the floor had stopped pretending to work. The officers stared at their dead boards, at the dark grid, at the single ship in the dark that had reached inside the most secure place on the frontier, and read out its secrets like a list of stores. And I understood that we had arrived at the true turning point, the one the whole long mistake had been bending toward, and that what happened next would decide whether my warning ended as a near miss, or as the first line of something far larger. A new presence joined the hall then, through the long channels that connect the frontier to the inner worlds. Prefect Soon, of the Governing Council, her image standing tall and pale at the Marshal's side, her voice carrying the weight of a power that even Edrock had to bend to. She had been watching. The inner worlds had been watching, I realized, the whole time, the way the powerful always watch a frontier problem from a safe distance, ready to claim the victory, or assign the blame. "Marshal," Suen said, "explain to me how one vessel has done this." "We do not yet know, Prefect," Edrock said, and I heard, for the first time, the smallest crack in his certainty. "We do not understand their methods," the analyst. And here he turned, and the whole hall turned with him, and I felt the full weight of being seen by people who could end my service with a word. The analyst filed an assessment of this species. He warned of this. I did not heed it. That was my error. It was an honest thing to say, and it cost him, and I respected him a little for it even then. But Suan did not care about honesty. She cared about the council, and the council cared about the long record of an empire that did not lose, and she had already decided what the record would say. "One ship cannot be allowed to dictate to the Imperium," she said. "Whatever it has done to our sensors, it is one ship. It carries one crew. It cannot hold a position against a fleet. Marshal, you will assemble the frontier fleet. You will bring it to Hollowspire, and you will make it plain to this Commander Crane, and to whatever world sent her, that the Imperium does not return what it holds, because it is asked twice in a firm voice. We will speak with them from strength. They will learn the proper order of things, as every young species learns it. Begin." I stepped forward. I knew it was hopeless. I stepped forward anyway, because I had carried the cold understanding for 3 seasons, and I could not let the order pass without saying the words one more time. "Prefect," I said, "it is one ship, and it has already beaten this entire station without firing once. You are about to send a fleet against a species we do not understand, on the assumption that numbers will matter. I do not think numbers will matter. I think that is exactly the assumption they want us to make. Everything in my study of them says they let an opponent commit to the obvious move, and then take it apart. If we bring the fleet, we are doing the thing they have planned for. I am begging the council, give the crew back. Let them leave. The cost of this is small right now. It will not stay small." For a moment, Suchan looked at me, truly looked, and I let myself hope. Then she looked away, because hope is a thing the powerful cannot afford when the record is at stake. "Your warning is noted, analyst," she said, in the tone that means a thing has been filed and forgotten. "Marshal, assemble the fleet." And so the order went out, across the frontier, to every vessel the Imperium kept in that quiet corner of the dark. The great engines woke. The fleet that had never lost began to gather, ship by ship, a tide of gray hulls drawing toward Hollowspire, and the single Terran vessel that waited there, patient and unmoving, exactly as Commander Crane had said it would. I stood in the great hall and watched the fleet assemble on the board, and I felt the cold understanding settle all the way down into me at last. We were doing it. We were making the obvious move, the proud move, the move that an empire makes when a young species tells it no. And somewhere out in the dark, I was certain, Commander Eleanor Crane was watching the same fleet gather, and she was not afraid, because she had already read the ending, and the ending was not the one the council believed in. The Resolute had stopped moving. It hung in the dark, surrounded now by the first ships of the gathering fleet, a single small hull at the center of a closing gray ring, and it did nothing at all. It did not run. It did not fire. It simply waited for us to finish the mistake we were so determined to make. And as the last of the frontier fleet slid into position, and the great weapons of 100 Imperium ships turned at last toward one Terran vessel, I understood that my warning had run out, and that whatever came next, the Imperium was about to learn the lesson the hard way, the only way it had ever been willing to learn anything. The fleet was in position. The order to demand surrender was about to be given, and the Resolute, alone at the center of everything, opened a channel one more time, and Commander Crane spoke 4 words that I have never forgotten. "You should not have," she said. Then the dark around the fleet came alive. There was no fire. I want to be precise about that, because in the seasons since, the story has grown in the telling, and people who were not there speak of light and thunder and the dark splitting open. None of that happened. What happened was quieter and far more terrible. The fleet had drawn a closing ring around the Resolute. 100 Imperium hulls, every weapon ready, every commander waiting for the marshal's word, certain that they had finally trapped the single ship that had humiliated the station. And in the moment Commander Crane finished speaking, the ships that had been doing the trapping discovered, all at once, that they were the ones surrounded. They appeared in the space of a single heartbeat, not from any direction we could chart. They did not approach. There was no warning on the boards, No slow growth of a contact at the edge of the long eyes. One instant the dark beyond the fleet was empty, and the next instant it was full of Terran vessels, ranged in a wide sphere around the entire Imperium formation, as though they had always been there and had simply chosen, until that moment, to remain unseen. There were not many of them. That was the part the floor could not understand. We had been told to expect a horde, because that is what an empire imagines when it is afraid, a great screaming tide to be cut down. Instead, there were perhaps 30 ships, spaced wide and calm around 100 of ours, and the very fact that 30 were enough was its own kind of message. They had not brought a tide because they did not need one. They had brought exactly as many ships as it would take to make the point, and not one more. And they had crossed a distance that should have taken a season to arrive in an instant that the boards could not even measure. High Marshal Edrock stared at the board, and his crest had fallen all the way down now, flat against his skull, the posture of a being who has run out of the certainties that held him upright. "How?" he said, very softly, to no one. "How did they cross? How are they here?" I did not have a full answer. I have a better one now, but on that morning, all I had was the shape of it, drawn from years of listening to a species that had never stopped trying to make the impossible ordinary. "They have found a way to fold the distance," I said. "I do not know how. I only know that this is what the 9 days meant. The 9 days were not them traveling slowly. The 9 days were them arriving, and then waiting, and letting us believe they were one ship, until we had gathered everything we had in one place for them to look at." "A trap," Edrock said. "We built it ourselves," I said. "They only chose where to stand." Then the channels opened again, all of them, and this time, it was not only Commander Crane. Voices spoke from the Terran sphere, calm and unhurried, naming our ships. Not classes, names. The Imperium does not announce the names of its warships on open channels, for the names carry honor and history and are not given lightly to outsiders. But the Terran voices read them out, one by one, every hull in the fleet, and with each name, they spoke a small fact that should have been ours alone. The number of a vessel's crew, the name of its commander, the state of its drive, the faults in its systems that even the fleet's own records listed only in the most guarded files. They were not threatening to use any of it. They were simply showing us that they held all of it, the way Crane had shown us the station's secrets, the way a person sets every card face up on a table to end a game that the other player has not yet realized is over. And then Commander Crane spoke once more, and she said a thing that turned the morning, for me, into something I could not step back from. "Marshal Edrock," she said. "Prefect Sewin, I know you are both listening. Before this goes further, I want to speak to one person in your command, and I want the rest of you to hear me do it. There is an analyst with you. His name is Vren. He works in your listening halls. 3 seasons ago he studied my people and wrote you a warning, and he told you, as plainly as your empire would let him, not to take our ship and not to hold our crew. You did not listen to him. I want him to know that we listened to him. We have read his assessment. It reached us, as nearly everything of yours reaches us. It is the most accurate thing the Imperium has ever written about humanity, and the person who wrote it was the only one of you who saw us clearly, and he was ignored. Because empires do not like to be told that the small thing at the edge of the map is not small. Vren, if you are there, I want you to hear this from us, across all of it. You were right. I am sorry you had to be right alone." The hall was silent. Every officer on the floor, every commander on every ship in the fleet, every council member watching from the safe inner worlds, all of them now knew my name, and knew that the enemy knew it, and knew that the enemy had thanked me for warning them against the very empire I served. It is difficult to describe what that felt like. It was vindication, and it was a sentence, and it was both at once, and underneath both was a strange, unwanted warmth at being seen clearly by the only people in the whole affair who had bothered to read what I wrote. Prefect Sewin's image turned toward me, slowly, and her pale face held a question that I knew could end me. "You have been in contact with them," she said. It was not a question, in fact. It was an accusation, the easiest one, the one that would let the record blame a single analyst rather than the council's pride. "I have never spoken to them in my life," I said, and it was the plain truth. My assessment was filed in the listening halls, under seal, for the eyes of the command. If it reached them the same way our ship names just reached them, the same way our station codes reached them, the same way everything we believe is secret has reached them this entire morning. They are inside our records, Prefect. They have been inside our records for longer than we know. The only difference between my warning and our weapons is that they chose to read the warning and decided to honor the part of it that suited them. They are using my own words to tell you that I was right. That is not contact. That is the most frightening thing I have ever seen, because it means there has been nowhere, this whole time, that they could not reach. Suan did not answer at once, and in the silence, I understood that I had bought myself, for the moment, a thin reprieve. The council needed to blame someone, but it could not yet decide whether to blame me for being right or to use me for the same reason. It was then that Overseer Talon spoke, and the morning, which had been merely disastrous, began to slide toward something worse. Talon had been at the station the whole time, of course. He was the one who had taken the lodestar. He was the one whose pride had begun the entire mistake, and a being like that does not easily accept that his small victory has become the Empire's great humiliation. His image flickered into the hall beside the marshals, his crest raised in defiance against all reason, and he spoke in the loud, certain voice of someone who has decided that the only way out of a hole is to dig faster. "This is theater," Talnan said. "They have toys. They have tricks. They appear and they read out names, and they make the council tremble, but they have not fired a single shot, because they cannot. They are a young species playing at being a power. I took their ship without difficulty. I held their crew without resistance. I will not stand here while one commander in a borrowed accent lectures the Imperium on its own order. Marshal, give me one ship. Let me show this fleet that the Terrans bleed like anyone else. Let me fire on the vessel at the center, and we will see how quickly the theater ends when the curtain comes down." "Overseer," I said, and I did not care any more who heard me. "If you fire on them, you will learn exactly why they have not fired on us. They are not holding back because they cannot. They are holding back because they have not yet decided that we deserve what they can do. Do not make the decision for them." But Talon was past listening, and pride is faster than wisdom, and before the marshal could refuse him, the overseer reached past the chain of command, as a being of his rank could still do in that frontier, and he gave the order to a ship that was loyal to him. One Imperium vessel fired. I saw it on the board. A single weapon discharge, aimed at the Resolute. The kind of strike that had ended threats along the frontier for an age. And I held my breath, and the whole hall held its breath, and somewhere in me, a part that I am not proud of hoped, for half a heartbeat, that Talon was right, that the Terrans were theater, that the morning could still be saved by the Empire being what it had always been. The strike never reached the Resolute. I do not fully understand even now what happened to it. The weapon fired. The board showed the discharge leave the Imperium ship, and then, partway across the dark, it simply stopped being a threat. It did not explode. It did not turn back. It was, from one instant to the next, made harmless. Its energy bled away into nothing, as though the dark itself had reached out and closed a hand around it and let it go cold. The Resolute did not so much as shift its position. It had not needed to. The Terrans had taken a strike from a weapon that could break a station, and they had unmade it in flight, and they had done it without any visible effort at all, the way you might catch a thrown stone meant for a child and set it gently on the ground. And then they answered, and the answer was the most restrained and the most devastating thing of the entire morning. The ship that had fired, Talon's ship, went dark. Not destroyed, not harmed. Its drive stopped responding to its bridge. Its weapons reported that they no longer recognized their own crew. Its communications fell silent on every channel but one, and on that one channel, to the bridge of that single ship, a calm Terran voice spoke, so that the commander who had obeyed Talon's order could hear, and so that the recording would reach the fleet, and the council, and the inner worlds. "You fired on us," the voice said, without anger. "We have taken your ship's control, and we will hold it until this is over, and then we will give it back, undamaged, with everyone aboard unharmed. We want you to understand what just happened, so that no one else makes the same choice. We let your weapon reach nothing, and we took your ship, and we did not hurt a single one of you. We could have done a great deal more. We chose not to. Remember that we chose. The next time someone tells you that we cannot, remember that we did not, and ask yourself which is more frightening. The channel closed. Talma's ship hung in the dark, dead and whole, a captured thing at the heart of the very fleet that had come to rescue it, and the rest of the Imperium ships did not dare to move, because every commander among them had just watched a strike unmade in flight and a vessel taken without a scratch, and not one of them wished to be the next lesson. Overseer Talon's image had gone very still. The defiance had drained out of it. He had fired the Empire's certainty at the Terrans like a stone, and the Terrans had caught it and set it down and taken his ship as easily as breathing, and now, in front of the Council and the fleet and the analyst, he had not bothered to read. He had nothing left to say. It was High Marshal Edrock who finally spoke, and when he did, his voice had changed. The certainty was gone from it. What remained was something rarer in a being of his rank, and far more useful. It was the sound of a commander who has, at last, accepted the true shape of the thing in front of him, and has begun, against every habit of his long career, to think clearly. "Cease all weapons readiness," Edrock said. "Every ship. Now. We do not fire. We do not maneuver. We hold." A junior officer began to protest, to speak of the fleet's strength, of the Council's order, and Edrock cut him off with a word. "The fleet's strength is meaningless," he said. "I have watched it become meaningless. They unmade a strike in flight and took a ship without harming her crew. We have nothing to threaten them with. The only question that remains is whether we are wise enough to admit it before we make them angry. Cease readiness. That is an order, and I will answer for it to the Council." The fleet stood down. 100 Imperium ships let their weapons go quiet, ringed by 30 Terran vessels that had never raised theirs. And for a long moment, the dark held nothing but a great, charged stillness. The stillness of an empire, and a young species facing each other across the wreck of an assumption. Then Prefect Suan, watching from the safety of the inner worlds, did the thing that the Council always does. She tried to save the record. "Marshal," she said, and her voice was tight, "you have stood the fleet down before a single demand has been met. The Council will not accept surrender to a young species. Whatever they have done, the order remains. The Terrans must learn." "With respect, Prefect," Edrock said. And the respect was real, but the steel beneath it was new. "The Terrans have nothing left to learn from us this morning. We are the ones being taught. I will not throw the fleet against a force that has already shown it could take all of us as easily as it took one. If the Council wishes to relieve me, the Council may relieve me. But I will not give an order that ends with 100 ships dark in the water and 100 crews held in the dark, for the sake of a record that is already broken. The record broke 3 seasons ago, when we took a ship we should have left alone. Everything since has only been the bill arriving." I looked at him then, this marshal who had never lost, who an hour before had called a planet-breaking threat a small problem, and I saw that the morning had done to him what 3 seasons of my warnings could not. It had made him see, and I understood that the fight, the real fight, was no longer out in the dark between the fleet and the Terran sphere. The real fight had moved inside the Imperium itself, between those who had finally seen the truth and those who could not afford to, and I had landed, whether I wished it or not, squarely in the middle of it. The channel from the Resolute opened one final time that morning, and Commander Crane spoke, and her voice carried, for the first time, the smallest thread of something that was almost approval. "Marshal Edrock," she said, "thank you for standing your fleet down. That took more courage than firing would have, and I do not think your Council understands that yet. Here is where we are. Your station is open to us. Your fleet cannot stop us. Your secrets are ours, and our people are still in your holding cells. We are not going to force the door, not yet, because we would rather you opened it. So I am going to give you and your Council 1 full day, by your own reckoning, to bring the crew of the Lodestar to us, unharmed, of your own choice. 1 day. Use it to win the argument I know is already happening inside your empire. The argument between the ones who see and the ones who will not. I have read enough of you to know that argument is happening right now. I am asking the ones who see to win it. For everyone's sake, including yours." The channel closed. And in the great hall, the argument she had named so precisely began in earnest. The Council and the Command and the proud and the frightened, all turning on one another, and at the center of it, stood a marshal who had finally seen, a prefect who could not afford to, an overseer whose pride had become a liability, and one analyst from the listening halls who had written a warning that the enemy now quoted back to the Empire as proof. I had one day, the Empire had one day, and I knew, with the same cold certainty that had lived in me for 3 seasons, that how we used it would decide not just the fate of one crew, but whether the Imperium learned to share a galaxy with a species it could not rule, or broke itself, trying to prove that it could. The day did not begin with calm deliberation. It began the way these things always begin among the powerful, with everyone trying to make the disaster belong to someone else. I was summoned within the first hour, not by the marshal, but by the prefect, to a small chamber off the Great Hall, where the council kept its private channels. Soon's image was already there when I arrived, and she was not alone. Overseer Talon stood beside her, his pride rebuilt into something brittle and dangerous, and 2 council figures I did not know watched from the far worlds, their faces composed into the careful blankness that powerful beings wear when they are deciding whether you are useful or a problem. "Analyst Vren," Suin said, "the Terran commander named you. She praised your work. She called you the only one of us who saw clearly. You understand how that looks." "I understand exactly how it looks, Prefect," I said. "It looks as though the Empire would rather have a traitor to punish than a mistake to admit. I am neither convenient that way nor guilty. I wrote a warning. The warning was correct. If being correct is now an offense, then the listening halls should be emptied, because their entire purpose is to be correct about things the command would rather not hear." Taln made a low sound of contempt. "He speaks for them already. They quote his words and he defends them. Prefect, this is the contact the council fears, standing in front of us, wearing the face of an analyst." I did not let him finish the thought. I had been afraid all morning, and somewhere in the long hours the fear had burned down into something harder and clearer. "Overseer," I said, "you took a ship that was studying stars. You held a crew that posed no threat to anyone. You fired the first and only shot of this entire affair, against the explicit caution of the command, and you fired it because your pride could not bear to be small. Every step that brought the Empire to this chamber, you took, and I begged the command not to take. If you wish to find the being who handed the Terrans their opening, you need only look at your own reflection. I will not stand here and be made the cause of a mistake I tried to prevent." For a moment no one spoke, and I thought I had ended my own service in a single breath. Then one of the unknown council figures, an old one, with the pale and weathered look of a being who had survived many of these chambers, made a small gesture, and Talon fell silent, and the figure spoke to me directly. "The analyst is right that the order of events is not in question," the old one said. "Overseer Talon's conduct will be examined in its proper place. That is not why we have called you, analyst. We have called you because you are the only person in the service of the Imperium that the Terrans have publicly trusted. And trust, in a moment like this, is a tool too rare to waste. So I will ask you plainly, and I want a plain answer. You have studied them longer than anyone. If we return the crew, will they leave? Or is the crew merely the door, and once it is open, will they come through it for everything else?" It was the right question, finally, the only question that mattered, and I gave it the truth as far as I knew it. "They will leave," I said. "If we return the crew unharmed, and we let them go, they will go. I have read 3 seasons of their history, and their stories, and their arguments, and the thing the Empire most needs to understand about them is this. They are not conquerors. They do not want our worlds. They do not want our records, or our records' secrets, except as proof to make us listen. What they want is their people back, and they want to be treated as something other than prey. Give them both, and the Resolute and its 30 ships will fold back into the dark, and you will not see them again, unless you go looking. But," and here I let the word hang, because the rest of it was the part the council needed most, "if you harm the crew, or if you try to keep them, or if pride wins this argument the way it has won every argument the Imperium has ever had, then the crew stops being a door and becomes a debt. And I have seen what this species does about a debt. They carry it. They build their whole strength around it. And they pay it back in full, no matter how long it takes or how far they have to come. Right now we owe them a small thing, easily settled. Do not let the Empire turn it into a large one." The old council figure studied me for a long moment, and I could not read what passed behind those weathered eyes. Then the image inclined, very slightly, the smallest acknowledgement, and the channel to the far worlds closed, and I was left in the small chamber with Suin, and a seething town, and the knowledge that I had, perhaps, just won the first move of the only fight that could still be won. But there was a thread I had not yet pulled, and it was the one that would matter most in the hours to come. Down in the holding levels of Hollow Spire, the crew of the Lodestar were still in their cells, and their captain, a woman named Leah Sutton, had been silent through the entire ordeal, asking for nothing, demanding nothing, watching her captors with a patience that the holding officer's reports described, with growing unease, as unsettling. She had told her crew to wait, the report said. She had told them that someone was coming. She had said it with such certainty, days before any Terran ship appeared on any board, that the holding officer had marked her words as the empty hope of a prisoner, and had filed them, and had forgotten them. She had not been hoping, she had known. And as I left the small chamber, and made my way toward the holding levels, because I had decided that if the Empire was going to argue, I at least would go and look at the people the argument was about, I understood that Captain Leah Sutton had been telling us the truth all along, the same way her commander had, the same way I had, and that the Empire had filed all three of our truths and forgotten them, and that the bill for all that forgetting was now exactly 1 day from coming due. The holding levels of Hollow Spire were cold and gray and quiet, the way the Empire built all the places where it kept things it did not value. I had clearance enough to walk them, barely, and the holding officer met me at the lift with a look that mixed suspicion and relief. The look of a being who has been left alone too long with a problem he does not understand, and is glad to share it with anyone, even an analyst the council had begun to mistrust. "You are here about the Terrans," he said. It was not a question. Everyone on the station was here about the Terrans now. "I am here about the crew," I said. "I want to see them. I want to see her." He did not have to ask who I meant. He led me down a long corridor lined with cells, and through the transparent walls I saw them, the people of the Lodestar, a small crew sitting in the cold and the quiet, with a calm that I had not expected. They were not weeping, they were not raging. They sat, and a few of them spoke softly to one another, and one of them was working through some kind of exercise of the hands, slow and deliberate, the practice of a being keeping itself ready. They did not look like prey. They looked like people who were waiting for a thing they were certain of, and the certainty had made them, of all the strange things, calm. And at the end of the corridor was the captain. Leah Sutton sat alone in her cell, upright, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes open and steady. She was not large. By the Empire's measure, she was small, soft, unremarkable. Exactly the sort of being our models filed under harmless. And yet there was a stillness in her that made the holding officer keep his distance, a stillness that I recognized, because I had seen its like only once before that day, in the voice of a commander, out in the dark, who had unmade a strike in flight, and apologized to me across an entire war for being right alone. I stood at the wall of her cell, and she looked up at me, and she studied me the way I had spent 3 seasons studying her people, with patience and without fear. "You are not one of the soldiers," she said. Her words came through the cell's translator, but the meaning was clear. "You came down here on purpose. Why?" "My name is Vran," I said. "I work in the listening halls of the Empire. 3 seasons ago I wrote a warning. I told them not to take your ship, and not to hold you. They did not listen." Something changed in her face then, a small loosening, as though a thing she had held carefully had been confirmed. "Vren," she said slowly, "the analyst. Eleanor mentioned you would be here, somewhere in all of this. She said if I ever met you, I should thank you. So, thank you. You tried." "I failed," I said. "You are still in a cell." "You tried," she said again, as though that were the thing that mattered, and perhaps to her people it was. "Do you know what your Empire got wrong about us? It is not our ships. It is not even our weapons. It is this." She lifted one hand and gestured, slowly, at the cells along the corridor, at her crew sitting in the cold. "Your Empire looked at us and saw a small number of small people on a small ship, and it decided we were not worth much, because we are few, and we are soft, and we are far away. And the part it could not understand, the part that brought a fleet folding out of the dark to a station at the edge of nowhere, is that we do not measure ourselves the way you measure us. There are not many of us here, but every single one of us is worth coming for. Your empire holds a few prisoners and thinks it holds something small. My people look at the same few prisoners and see something they will cross the whole dark to bring home. That is the difference. You count us, and we count for each other, and you will never outcount a people who refuse to be counted. I have thought about those words many times in the seasons since. At the time they landed in me like a stone into still water, spreading rings of understanding that I am still learning to read. The empire was old and vast and certain, and it had built its whole strength on numbers, on the idea that enough was always enough. And this small woman in a cold cell had named, in a few quiet sentences, the exact place where that certainty failed. We counted. They counted for each other. And one of those is a strength that grows the more it is tested, and the other is a strength that breaks the moment it meets something it cannot divide. You said someone was coming, I said, days ago, before any ship appeared. The holding officer filed it as hope. It was not hope, was it? No, she said simply. It was Tuesday. It was the certain knowledge that my people do not leave their own behind. I did not need to see a ship to know it was coming. I only needed to know it was us. She tilted her head, studying me again. You came down here, analyst, and I do not think you came for the Empire. I think you came because you wanted to look at the people the argument upstairs is about. I think you are the only one of them who remembers that we are people at all. So I am going to tell you something. The way you told me about your warning. There is something wrong on this station right now. My crew has watched the guards change 3 times in the last hour. The rotation has broken. They are bringing equipment to this level that does not belong on a level where you keep guests. Something is being prepared, and it is being prepared quietly, and your kind eyes are about to be very far from where the next mistake gets made. If you mean to stop it, you should hurry. I turned and looked back down the corridor, and I saw it, the thing she had seen. The thing I had walked past without reading because I had been looking at the prisoners and not at the room. There were containers along the far wall that had not been there when I arrived. There were guards in a configuration that made no sense for holding, and a great deal of sense for moving. And the holding officer, I realized, had met me at the lift, not only out of relief, but out of a kind of anxious guilt. The look of a being who has been given an order he does not like, and is hoping someone will make him not carry it out. I left the captain at a near run. I found the holding officer at the lift, and I did not waste words. They are moving the crew, I said. Who gave the order? He did not pretend not to understand. The guilt had won. The overseer, he said quietly. Town. He has authority over Frontier Holdings, and he has invoked it. The order is to relocate the crew, immediately and quietly, to a facility in the inner dark, away from the station, before the day ends. The reasoning, as it was given to me, is that the Terrans cannot take what they cannot find, and that with the crew hidden, the Council will have something to bargain with at last. He met my eyes, and the misery in his face was real. I do not think it is wise, analyst. I think the Terran commander said, plainly, not to look for a clever way out. But I am a holding officer. I do not refuse overseers. You are about to, I said, because if that transport leaves this station, with that crew aboard, the Empire turns a debt it can pay into one it cannot, and everyone on this station, you and me included, will be standing inside the place where the bill comes due. Stop the loading. Now, I will answer for it. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the whole Empire, every officer who had ever been given an order he knew was wrong, and had carried it out, because refusing was harder. And then, to his lasting credit, he chose the harder thing. He turned and began giving orders to halt the loading. He was too late. Pride had moved faster than wisdom, the way it always did, and even as the holding officer shouted down the corridor, I felt the deep vibration of a transport's engines through the floor of the station. The crew had not all been moved, but Captain Sutton and a portion of her people had been taken to the docking bay while I stood talking, and the transport carrying them was already sliding out of Hollow Spire into the dark, running on a blind route that Town had chosen, precisely because the Terran sphere was watching the main station, and not the empty stretch of nothing behind it. I ran for the nearest command station, and opened the only channel I could think to open. I did not have a way to reach the Terrans directly, but I knew, with a certainty that the entire morning had taught me, that I did not need one. They were inside our networks. They had been the whole time. So I did the only thing I could. I spoke aloud, into an open Imperium channel, knowing they were listening, the way they were always listening. "This is Vren, of the listening halls," I said, and my voice shook, and I did not care. "A transport has just left Hollowspire from the rear docking bay, carrying Captain Leah Sutton and part of her crew. Overseer Taln has ordered them moved to a hidden facility in the inner dark, against the command, and against your warning. This is the clever move you told us not to make. I am telling you, because I would rather the debt stay small. The transport is running a blind route behind the station. I do not know how to stop it. I am hoping you do." For 3 breaths there was nothing, and I thought, with a sick certainty, that I had been too slow, that the transport would fold into the deep dark and vanish, and the small debt would become the large one, and everything would come apart. Then the dark behind the station, the empty stretch that Taln had been so sure was unwatched, was empty no longer. A single Terran ship folded into existence, directly across the transport's path, so close and so sudden that the transport's pilot, on the channel I was still monitoring, made a sound of pure animal shock. The ship was small and fast, and it sat across the blind route like a hand laid flat, and a voice came from it, calm and quick. A man's voice this time, light and almost cheerful, in the way of a being who is very good at his work and is enjoying being good at it. "Imperium Transport, this is Marcus Webb of the Terran vessel Tempest," the voice said. "I am going to need you to cut your drive and hold position. We know who you have aboard. We would like them back, please. And we would like to do this without anyone getting hurt, which means you stop, right now, and we sort this out like reasonable people. Cut your drive." The transport did not cut its drive. Talon's pilots had their orders, and the orders did not include surrendering to a single small ship, and so the transport did the thing that desperate beings do. It ran. It threw everything it had into its engines, and tried to fold past the Tempest into the deep dark, and as it did, it triggered the one card Talon had been holding, the one thing the Empire had that the Terrans had not yet seen. A concealment field. The transport vanished from every sensor at once, wrapped in a shroud of the Empire's oldest and most closely held technology, a thing that bent light and reading and folding alike around it, so that it could not be seen, could not be charted, could not be followed. It was the Empire's great hidden trick, used only in its most secret operations, and Talon had been carrying it the whole time, his last clever way out. The transport went dark and silent and gone, and for a long, terrible moment, even the Terrans could not find it. I stood at the command station with my hearts pounding, and watched the Tempest hang alone in the empty dark where a transport had been a moment before, and I thought that pride had won after all, that the clever move had worked, that Captain Sutton and her people were folding away into a hidden place from which the Empire would dole them out one grudging concession at a time, and that the small debt had just become very, very large. I had underestimated them. After everything that morning had shown me, I had still underestimated them, because I had been thinking of them as a power, and a power has limits, and a power can be defeated by a clever enough trick. But they were not only a power, they were a people who adapted faster than anything our models had ever charted, and a concealment field that the Empire had perfected over an age was, to them, simply a new problem, and new problems were the thing they were best at in all the galaxy. On the channel, a new voice joined Webb's, a woman's, fast and focused, the voice of a being deep in a piece of work. "Marcus, hold position. Do not chase blind. I have the field. Give me a moment." A pause, filled with the sound of someone thinking at a speed I could barely follow. "This is Grace Holloway. For anyone keeping notes, their concealment is bending our returns around a moving center, but it cannot hide the hole it makes. Nothing can hide a hole. It has to push our readings around something, and the something is the transport, and the shape of the push tells me where the transport is, even though I cannot see it. I am solving the shape. Marcus, when I give you a heading, take it on faith, because the heading will be empty space until it is not." I did not fully understand it then, and I am not certain I fully understand it now, but the thing she had done, in the space of perhaps 2 minutes, was take a concealment technology that the Empire had spent an age perfecting, and find the single flaw in it that the Empire had never found. The simple truth that a thing which hides itself by pushing the dark around it must, by pushing, reveal the shape of what it is hiding. The Empire had used that field for generations, and never seen the flaw, because the Empire was old and certain, and did not look for flaws in what already worked. And a Terran engineer had found it in 2 minutes, because the Terrans looked at everything as though it might be broken, and so they always found the place where it was. Heading, Holloway said, and gave a string of figures, and Marcus Webb took the Tempest into what looked, on every sensor, like empty dark. And the empty dark was not empty. The Tempest folded a short, precise distance, and came out exactly across the path of the hidden transport. And this time there was no shock and no running, because the transport's pilots understood, in that instant, that the one trick they had left did not work anymore, that the field they had trusted to make them invisible had been solved by a being who had needed only 2 minutes, and the assumption that nothing is ever truly hidden. Imperium transport, Webb said, and his voice had lost none of its calm and gained a small, hard edge. I can see you now. I am going to be able to see you wherever you go, because my colleague is very, very good at her job, and your invisibility is no longer invisible. So I am going to ask you one more time, and this is the last time I ask. Cut your drive. Stop. We are not going to hurt you, and we are not going to hurt the people you took, and we are not going to let you run. Choose. This time the transport stopped. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. On the channel I heard the transport's drive fall silent, heard the pilots, defeated and afraid, surrender at last. And then I heard a third voice on the Terran side, level and unhurried, a voice I had been waiting to hear, and the relief that went through me at the sound of it surprised me with its depth. This is Commander Crane, she said. Captain Sutton, are you there? And from the transport, faint and clear, came the voice of Leah Sutton, the small woman from the cold cell, and it was steady, and there was something in it that was almost laughter. I am here, Eleanor. I told them you were coming. I do not think they believed me until just now. They never do, Crane said, and for the first time all morning there was warmth in her voice. Real warmth. The warmth of a being whose people were about to come home. We have you. We are going to bring you and your crew across, and then we are going to finish this, properly, with the people who tried to hide you. Hold on, we are almost there. The Tempest moved alongside the transport, and the recovery began, and I stood at the command station of a station that had just tried and failed to make a clever move, and I felt the morning turn under me one more time. Because I knew what came next. I knew that Overseer Talon had just played the Empire's last hidden card, and watched it fail in 2 minutes. I knew that the Council, watching all of this, had now seen its newest plan unravel as thoroughly as the last. And I knew that Commander Crane had said, in that warm and terrible voice, that she was going to finish this properly, with the people who had tried to hide her crew. The argument inside the Empire had run out of clever moves. There was only the truth left now, and the truth was about to be delivered to Overseer Talon, and to the Council, and to the hierarch on the highest throne of all, by a species that had crossed the whole dark to bring its people home, and had just proven, beyond any further doubt, that there was nowhere left to hide from it, and nothing left to hide behind. The crew of the Lodestar were coming home, and the Empire was about to learn what it cost to make a small debt large. The recovery took only minutes. I watched it on the boards, the small shapes crossing from the dead transport to the Tempest, and I watched Overseer Talon's authority die with each one. When the last of them was aboard, and the Tempest folded calmly back toward the Terran sphere, with Captain Sutton and her people safe inside it, the channels of Hollow Spire filled with a silence that was worse than any alarm. Everyone had watched. The Council had watched, and the Empire's last hidden card lay face up on the table, beaten in 2 minutes by a being named Grace Holloway, who had needed nothing but the assumption that nothing is ever truly hidden. Talon tried to speak. His image appeared in the Great Hall, where I had returned, and he began to explain himself, began to speak of authority over frontier holdings, and of bargaining positions, and of the proper firmness of the Empire, and no one in the hall would meet his eyes. High Marshal Edrock listened to perhaps 4 words of it before he raised a hand. You moved the crew against the command, Edrock said. His voice was very quiet and very cold, the cold of a being who has decided something and will not be moved from it. You played the concealment field, our most guarded secret, and you lost it to them, in the time it takes to cross a corridor. They now know that the field can be solved, which means it can never be trusted again, anywhere in the Empire, which means your single act of pride has cost us a thing we spent an age building. And you did all of it after the Terran commander stood in the dark and asked us, plainly, not to look for a clever way out. Be silent, Overseer. You have done enough. You will answer for this in the proper place, and I do not think the proper place will be gentle. Talon was silent. His pride, the pride that had started the entire affair 3 seasons ago with the taking of a study ship, had finally run all the way out, and what was left was a being who had gambled the Empire's certainty and lost it, piece by piece, in a single day. And then the channels changed again, and a new presence entered, and the whole hall went still in a different way, the way a room goes still when the highest power in it finally chooses to speak. It was the hierarch. I had never seen the hierarch, of course. Almost no one in the service ever does. The supreme authority of the Imperium does not appear on frontier channels, does not concern itself with the small affairs of distant stations. That the hierarch appeared now told everyone in the hall, more clearly than any report, exactly how far this had risen, exactly how completely the affair at Hollowspire had become the affair of the entire Empire. The image was vast and pale and old beyond reckoning, and it spoke slowly, in a voice that carried the weight of an age of rule, and what it said was not what I expected. I have watched, the hierarch said. I have watched a study ship be taken that should have been left alone. I have watched a warning be filed and forgotten. I have watched a fleet gather and become meaningless, and a hidden field be solved in 2 minutes, and a clever move fail, and the pride of an empire be handed back to it in pieces by a young species that asked only for its own people. I have watched all of it, and I have decided that the time for the empire to be certain has ended, and the time for the empire to be wise has begun, though it comes late, and at great cost. The vast pale eyes seemed, for a moment, to find me, the small analyst at the edge of the hall. There is one among you who saw this, who wrote it down, who was right alone. Analyst Vren, step forward. The Empire has spent 3 seasons not listening to you. It is going to start now. I stepped forward, and the entire weight of the Imperium turned toward me, and somewhere out in the dark, Commander Eleanor Crane opened a final channel, her voice level and unhurried, and carrying, at last, the smallest note of something that might have been respect. Hierarch, she said, we have part of the crew back. The rest are still on your station. I am going to come and collect them now, myself, in person, and I am going to do it without a single shot fired, and I am going to do it whether you open the door or not. But I would rather you opened it. I would rather the first time your people and mine stand in the same room, it is because you chose to let us, and not because we had to come through the wall. You have an analyst who understands us. Listen to him. And then send him to meet me, because I am tired of speaking to your empire through its machines, and I think it is time someone from your side and someone from mine stood in the same room and decided, like people, how this ends. The channel closed. The hierarch's vast pale gaze rested on me, and I understood, with a cold clarity that hollowed me out all over again, that the warning I had written 3 seasons ago had carried me, against every probability, to the very center of the largest moment in the history of the Empire, and that what happened next would happen in a room, with me in it, standing between a Terran commander who had never lost and a hierarch who had finally chosen to listen, and that the whole long mistake was about to come down to whether I could help 2 powers find the thing that pride had hidden from both of them. Go, analyst, the hierarch said. Go and meet her, and bring our people home. They came to the station openly, which was the bravest thing I had ever seen. I had expected the Terrans to demand a handover at the edge of the dark, a careful exchange across a safe distance, the way frightened powers always arrange these things. Instead, Commander Crane brought a single small craft from the Resolute to the main dock of Hollowspire, and she walked into the heart of the Empire's station with no shield around her, but the simple, total certainty that the Empire could not stop her if it tried. It was a kind of strength I had never charted in my models, because my models did not have a column for a being who walks into the place that holds her people and trusts her own power so completely that she does not even raise a weapon. She did not need to threaten. The not threatening was the threat. We had all seen what they could do, and so a Terran commander walking unarmed and calm through the Empire's most secure station said, more loudly than any fleet, that she had nothing to fear from us, and we had a great deal to fear from her, and she would prefer, all the same, that no one made her prove it again. I met her at the dock, because the hierarch had ordered it and because I would have gone anyway. She came out of the small craft with 3 others, and I will tell you their names, because they have stayed with me. There was Marcus Webb, the pilot, light on his feet and quick of eye, who had folded across a transport's path and offered a desperate ship the chance to stop, like a man offering a friend a seat. There was Grace Holloway, the engineer, smaller than the others and very still, with the kind of quiet attention that I recognized at once as the attention of a being who is always taking things apart in her mind. The being who had solved an age of the Empire's secret in 2 minutes, because she assumed it could be solved. And there was a steady, broad-shouldered man named Oliver Bennett, who said little and watched everything, and whose calm was not the calm of certainty, but the calm of a being who has decided what he will and will not allow, and has made his peace with it. And there was Eleanor Crane. She was not large, none of them were, by the Empire's measure. She was a being of middle years, with steady eyes and a stillness at her center that her voice had only hinted at, and when she looked at me, I felt the whole weight of being truly seen by a person who had read what I wrote and believed it. She crossed the dock to me, and she stopped a few paces away, and she did the strangest thing. She inclined her head, the way her captain had told me her people thank one another, and she said simply, in careful Imperial speech, "Analyst Vren, we meet at last. Thank you for the warning, and thank you for the transport. You did not have to tell us about Town's move. You chose to. I will not forget that. You would have found it without me," I said. "Probably," she agreed, and there was the faintest warmth at the edge of her mouth. "But you did not know that when you spoke. You told us anyway, knowing it might cost you everything, because you would rather the right thing happen than the clever thing. That is the whole of it, Vren. That is the only thing that has ever mattered in any of this. You are the only one of your empire who has, from the very beginning, simply tried to do the right thing. I came here to collect my people. I am glad that the first person from your side I get to stand with is you." I did not have words for what that did to me. I had spent 3 seasons being ignored, and a single day being feared and suspected, and now the commander of the force that had humbled the entire empire stood in front of me and named the one thing I had been trying to do all along, and named it as the thing that mattered most. I think, if I am honest, that was the moment I stopped being only an analyst of the empire and started being something else, something that did not yet have a name, a being who belonged a little to both sides and fully to neither. "Your people are this way," I said. "Most of them are still in the holding levels. I will take you to them." We walked together through the station, the Terran commander and her 3, and me, and around us the Empire watched. Officers stood frozen at their posts as we passed. Guards who an hour before would have moved to stop any intruder now pressed themselves against the walls, because they had all seen the boards, and they all knew that their weapons did not work against these beings, and that even if their weapons had worked, the only thing standing between Hollow Spire and whatever the Terrans wished to do was the Terrans' own choice. We walked through a station full of armed soldiers, and not one of them raised a hand, because every one of them understood, at last, the thing the Council had taken a fleet and a lost secret to learn. The Empire was not in control. The Empire had not been in control since the moment the Resolute folded out of the dark. The Terrans had simply allowed the Empire to keep pretending, the way you allow a proud elder to believe he is still leading the way down a path you are quietly guiding him along. High Marshal Edrock met us at the entrance to the holding levels. He stood very straight, and he looked at Commander Crane for a long moment. And then he did a thing that I had not thought a Marshal of the Imperium capable of. He inclined his head, the Terran way, the way he must have seen on the channels, an old soldier offering a young power, a gesture of respect in the power's own custom. "Commander Crane," he said, "I am High Marshal Edrock. I ordered the fleet that gathered against you. I was wrong to do it, and I stood it down when I understood that. I have come to open the holding levels myself, so that the return of your people is done by my hand, and not left to a junior, because the mistake was the Empire's, and the Empire should be the one to set it right. Your people are unharmed. You have my word, and you may verify it however you wish, because I know my word alone is no longer worth much to you. Your word is worth a great deal to me, Marshal, Crane said, and she meant it. You stood your fleet down, when standing it down was harder than fighting. You told your council the truth when the truth cost you. There are not many beings, in any species, who can do that. I will take your word, and I will verify it too, and there is no insult in both. Open the doors. The doors opened, and the crew of the Lodestar came out into the corridor, and there was a sound then that I had never heard on that cold gray station, and will never forget. The sound of a people being reunited. The soft and overwhelming sound of beings who had been taken finding the ones who had crossed the whole dark to come for them. They did not cheer. It was quieter and deeper than cheering. They simply found each other, the freed crew and the commander, and her three, and for a moment, the Empire and its machines, and its certainty fell away entirely, and there was only a small group of people in a cold corridor, holding on to one another, home at last. And then Captain Leah Sutton came up the corridor from the dock, where the tempest had brought her, and she walked straight to Eleanor Crane, and the two of them stood facing each other, and Sutton said, "I told them you were coming." "You always do," Crane said, "and I always do. That is the deal, Leah. That is the whole deal." And the two of them held the moment, captain and commander, and I understood that this small, fierce loyalty between two beings, was the engine that had moved a fleet across the dark, was the thing the Empire's models had no column for, was the strength that we had so badly underestimated. "They count us," Sutton had said in her cold cell. "We count for each other," and here was what that meant, made flesh in a gray corridor at the edge of nowhere, a loyalty so total that it had reached across an impossible distance and folded the certainty of an empire into pieces, without a single being being harmed. It should have ended there. It would have ended there, and the seasons since would have been simpler, if Pride had not had one last move in it. Overseer Taln had been ordered to remain in his quarters, his authority stripped, his conduct awaiting the proper examination. He did not remain in his quarters. A being like Taln, who had built his whole self on certainty, and watched that certainty handed back to him in pieces all day long, cannot sit quietly while the Empire kneels in a corridor to the very species that ruined him. And so, in the moment of the reunion, when everyone's attention was on the freed crew, Taln did the last and most desperate thing his pride could find. There was a defensive system buried in the holding levels, a containment measure built for the rare event of a mass escape, a thing that could flood the corridors with a force meant to subdue anything that moved. It was meant to harm prisoners who tried to flee. It had never been used. And Overseer Taln, from a side station, his access not yet fully revoked, triggered it, with the crew of the Lodestar, and the commander who had come for them, standing directly in its path. I think, in his ruined mind, he meant to take the moment from them, to prove that the Empire could still strike even as it knelt, to turn the reunion into something terrible, so that he would not be the only thing that had been broken that day. I saw it begin. I saw the side station's panel light, and I saw Taln's hand on it, and I understood in a single sick instant exactly what he had done. There was no time to shout a warning that the system could hear. There was no time for the Terrans to find and solve it, fast as they were. There was only time for one thing, and I am not a soldier, and I am not brave by nature, and I had spent my whole life in the listening halls being careful and quiet. But I moved. I crossed the space to the side station faster than I knew I could, and I did the only thing I could think to do, which was to put myself between Taln's hand and the controls and tear the access feed loose with my own hands. The physical line that fed the panel its authority, ripping it free of the wall in a shower of sparks that burned me, and that I did not feel until much later. The system did not flood the corridor. It had begun, and then it died, half-triggered, because the feed that gave it power was suddenly hanging in pieces in my hands. The corridor was safe. The crew was safe. Eleanor Crane and her three, and the freed people of the Lodestar stood unharmed, in a corridor that, a heartbeat before, had been about to become something I cannot bear to imagine. And Overseer Taln stood at the dead side station, his hand still raised toward controls that no longer answered, and looked at me, the small analyst he had never bothered to read. the one who had warned the Empire against the very pride that now stood ruined in front of all of them. What happened next happened quickly, and it happened in a way that taught me the last and deepest thing I learned about the Terrans that day. Oliver Bennett, the steady, broad-shouldered man, had moved the instant Talon's hand reached the panel, far faster than his calm had suggested he could. He reached Talon a breath after the system died, and he did not strike him, and he did not harm him. He took hold of the Overseer, firmly and completely, and he held him still, and he looked at the being who had just tried to turn a reunion into a catastrophe, and he said, in a level voice, "It is over. You are done. Stop." And that was all. No retribution. No fury. A being who had just watched an enemy try to harm the people he had crossed the dark to protect, and who responded by simply stopping him, holding him, and saying that it was over. High Marshal Edrock was at the side station a moment later, and his fury was a cold and terrible thing, but it too found no outlet in harm. He took custody of Talon from Bennett with a curt word of thanks that cost him to give to an outsider, and he had the Overseer removed, and his voice when he spoke to the remaining officers was the voice of a being who has reached the absolute end of his patience. "Overseer Talon is to be confined under full guard," he said. "He has attempted to harm guests of the Empire after every authority over him was stripped, in defiance of the command, and the council, and the hierarch. There will be no leniency. The Empire will not hide what he has done, and it will not excuse it. Take him." They took him, and Eleanor Crane crossed the corridor to me, where I stood with my burned hands and my torn feet, and my heart's pounding, and she looked at the damage I had done to myself, and then she looked at me, and there was something in her face that I had not seen all day, something that went deeper than respect. "You put yourself between my people and that," she said quietly. "You did not have to. You are not one of mine. You owed us nothing. You came across the whole dark for your people," I said. "I crossed a corridor. It was a smaller thing." "No," she said. "It was the same thing. It was exactly the same thing, Vren, and you know it. You count for us now, whether you meant to or not, the same way we count for each other. That is not a small thing. That is the only thing." And she took my burned hands, carefully, in hers, in some gesture of her people that I did not know but understood completely, and she held them for a moment, and then she let them go. It was over. The crew of the Lodestar were free, all of them, gathered and safe and going home. Overseer Talon was confined, his pride finally and fully spent, awaiting a reckoning that the Empire would not hide. The fleet that had gathered stood down. The secret that had been lost was lost. And a Terran commander had walked into the most secure station of the Imperium, collected her people without firing a single shot, and walked out again, having shown the Empire, beyond any further doubt, that the only thing that had ever stood between Hollow Spire and ruin was the Terran's own choice not to bring it. But as I stood in that corridor, with my burned hands and my deep new understanding, I knew that the affair was not finished. The crew were going home, yes. The immediate crisis was past. But the galaxy had changed in a single day, and an empire that had been certain for an age now faced a species it could not rule. And the great question, the question that the hierarch and the council, and Commander Crane and I, would all have to answer together, had only just been asked. The Empire had survived its mistake. Barely. The Terrans had proven they could humble it without harming it. The hardest thing was still to come, and it was not a fight, because the fight was over, and the Terrans had won it by choosing not to have one. The hardest thing was this. Two powers, old and young, certain and adaptive, now had to decide how to share a galaxy that neither of them could have to itself. And I, the analyst who had written a warning that no one read, who had torn a feed loose with my own hands to keep a corridor safe, who belonged a little to both sides now, and fully to neither, was about to find myself standing in the center of that question, helping two peoples build, out of the wreck of an empire's pride, something that had never existed in all the long age of the dark. Eleanor Crane looked out toward the dock, toward her ship, toward the dark where the rest of her people waited. Then she looked back at me. "Come with us, Vren," she said. "Not to leave your empire, to speak for it. The hierarch asked me how this ends, and I think you and I are the ones who get to answer that. Let us go and answer it together." I went with them, and the Empire let me go. which told me how completely the day had changed everything. A junior analyst does not leave a station on the ship of a foreign power. But the hierarch had spoken, and the hierarch had named me the one who saw, and so the doors that should have been closed to me stood open, and I crossed the dock and boarded the small craft, and went out into the dark to the Resolute, the ship that had folded out of nowhere, and ended the certainty of an age. The inside of the Terran ship was not what I expected. I had imagined something cold and martial, a vessel built for the humbling of empires. Instead, it was warm, and lived in, and full of small signs of the beings who crewed it. Images of places I did not know fixed to the walls. Objects that served no purpose I could name, except that someone had cared enough to keep them. The freed crew of the Lodestar moved through it now as though they had never been away, folding back into the life of their people, with a completeness that made the cold cells of Hollow Spire seem like a bad dream that was already fading. And I understood. Walking those warm corridors, another piece of the thing the Empire had gotten wrong. We had looked at their ships and counted their weapons, and never once thought to ask what they were defending. They were not defending territory. They were defending this, the warmth and the small kept things, and the people who counted for one another. And a being will cross any dark, and solve any secret, and humble any empire, to keep a thing like that safe. They gave my burned hands proper care, a being named Claire Dawson tending to them with a gentleness that surprised me, asking me questions about the Empire not as an interrogator, but as a person who was simply, honestly curious about a people she had only ever known through their machines. And while she worked, the great meeting was arranged, the meeting that would decide how the affair ended, and the channels of the Resolute opened to carry it. The hierarch joined, vast and pale and old. Prefect soon joined, and the old weathered council figure, who had asked me the only question that mattered. High Marshal Edrock joined from the station, and on the Terran side there was Commander Crane, and beside her, joining now from a great distance, a senior voice of the Terran Union, an admiral named Helen Pierce, steady and gray, and carrying the weight of a people who had decided, long ago, that they would never again be taken. And in the center of it, between the oldest power in the dark and the youngest, sat me. The analyst who had written a warning that no one read, the one who saw, the bridge. We are here, the hierarch said slowly, to decide how an empire that has been certain for an age learns to share a galaxy with a people it cannot rule. I will be plain, because plainness is the only thing that has served anyone well in this affair. The Empire was wrong. It took what it should have left. It ignored the one among us who saw clearly, and it has paid, and it will go on paying, in lost certainty, and lost secrets, and lost pride, for a long time. I do not ask the Terrans to pretend otherwise. I ask only this. We have both seen, today, what happens when an old power decides a young one is small. I do not wish to see what happens next, if the two of us decide we cannot share the dark. So I ask the Terrans, and I ask my own analyst who somehow now speaks for both of us, to help me build the thing that has never existed in all the age of the Empire, a peace that is not the peace of one power kneeling to another, a peace between equals. I do not know how to build it. The Empire has never had to, so we will have to learn, and we will have to learn it from the one people in the galaxy who have proven they can teach an old thing something new. Eleanor Crane looked across the great meeting at the vast pale image of the hierarch, and then she looked at me, and then she spoke, and her voice was level and unhurried and carried, for the first time in all of it, real hope. We did not come to rule you, she said. We never wanted your worlds. We came for our people, and we have them, and by every word we gave you, we could leave now and never return. But your analyst said a thing to me, in a cold corridor, with his hands burned from keeping my people safe. He said that he crossed a corridor, and I crossed the dark, and that it was the same thing. And he was right. So, I do not think we should leave and never return. I think we should stay, and talk, and build the thing you named, the peace between equals. Because the alternative is that two peoples who could teach each other everything spend the next age afraid of one another instead. We are willing. The question is whether your empire, after an age of being certain, can truly learn to be one power among two. And I think the answer to that question is sitting in the middle of this meeting with burned hands, having already shown both of us exactly what it looks like to do the right thing instead of the certain one. The whole weight of two peoples turned toward me, and I understood that the affair had carried me, against every probability, to the one place I had never imagined I would stand, and that the warning I had written 3 seasons ago had been only the first word of a far longer thing, and that the longer thing was about to begin, and that I was going to have to help write it. The crisis was over. The crew were home. And the real work, the work of building a peace that had never existed, was about to start, and it was going to start with me. The peace did not come easily, and I want to be honest about that, because the comfortable version of this story ends with the great meeting and a handshake, and the true version took far longer and asked far more. An empire that has been certain for an age does not become humble in a single conversation. There were beings in the council who could not bear what had happened, who argued, even after everything, that the empire's honor demanded some answer, some reassertion of the old order, some way to make the record show that the Imperium had not simply knelt. The old weathered council figure named them to me later, the ones who clung to the certainty, and warned me that they would not vanish, that they would wait, and watch, and look for the moment when the Empire's nerve might be turned back toward the comfortable lie. I learned, in those long days of negotiation, that the hardest thing in any peace is not the enemy across the table. It is the part of your own people that would rather be proud than be safe. But the hierarch had chosen wisdom, and the hierarch's word, in the end, was the Empire's word, and so the negotiation went forward, day after day, through the slow and careful work of two peoples, learning to speak to each other as equals for the first time. I sat at the center of it the whole way through. I had not asked for the place, and I was not built for it, and there were nights when I lay awake in the warm guest quarters the Terrans had given me, and wondered how an analyst from the listening halls had come to hold the seam of the galaxy together with his own 2 hands. But I had written the warning, and I had crossed the corridor, and both peoples trusted me, precisely because I had never tried to win, only to do the right thing, and so the place was mine, whether I felt ready for it or not. The shape of the peace, when it finally came, was simpler than the long arguing that built it. The Empire acknowledged, in its own records, before its own people, that it had taken the lodestar wrongly, and that it had ignored a warning it should have heeded, and that the Terrans had every right to come for their own. That acknowledgement cost the Empire more than any tribute could have, because the Empire had never, in all its long age, written down that it was wrong. The Terrans, for their part, asked for nothing else. No worlds, no tribute, no reach into the Empire's space. They asked only that they be treated, from that day forward, as what they were. A power equal to the Empire, free to come and go in the open dark, their people never again to be taken, their ships never again to be seized, their world never again to be filed under harmless and small. And the two peoples agreed, in the end, to do the thing the hierarch had named in the great meeting, the thing that had never existed in all the age of the dark. They agreed to share it, not as ruler and subject, as neighbors, as equals, as two peoples who had looked across an impossible distance and decided, against all the long habit of fear, to build instead of break. I was made the bridge. That is the simplest way to say it. The Terrans needed someone who understood the Empire from the inside, and the Empire needed someone the Terrans trusted, and I was the only being in the galaxy who was both, and so the role found me the way the warning had found me, and the corridor had found me. By the simple logic of my being the one who happened to see, I became the first liaison between the Imperium and the Terran Union. An analyst from the listening halls turned into the seam that held two peoples together, and I have held that seam ever since, through good days and hard ones, and I would not trade it for any quiet post in any listening hall in all the Empire. The crew of the Lodestar went home. That was the part I had not expected to move me as it did. I stood on the dock of Hollow Spire, my hands still healing, and I watched the freed crew board their ships to return to the warm blue world at the edge of the quiet reach, and I watched Captain Leah Sutton stand for a moment at the threshold of her vessel and look back at the cold gray station that had held her. She found me in the small crowd, and she crossed to me, and she said the thing I have carried with me longer than almost anything else from those days. "You came down to the cells," she said, "when you did not have to. You looked at us when your whole empire was busy looking at our weapons. You remembered we were people. That is why all of this ended the way it did, and not the other way, analyst. Not because of the ships, not because of what Grace did to the field in 2 minutes. Because of you, choosing, in a cold corridor, to do the right thing instead of the easy one. My people will remember that. We remember everything. We held the wrong your empire did to us close, until it was answered. Yes. But we will hold this just as close. We will hold you just as close. You count for us now, Vren. You crossed the corridor. You are one of ours, in the way that matters, even if you never leave your empire. And we do not leave our own behind. Not ever. So if the day comes when the proud ones in your council turn against you for what you have built, you send one word out into the dark, and you will not have to wait long. You know that now. You have seen it. We come for our own. And then she boarded her ship, and the Terran vessels lifted from the dock and folded back into the open dark, and the warm blue world at the edge of the quiet reach was no longer a thing the Empire filed and forgot. It was a power, it was a neighbor, it was a people who, when one of their own was taken, crossed the whole dark to bring them home, and who had now, in their own quiet and total way, taken a place in the heart of the galaxy that the Empire would never again be able to ignore. I have thought a great deal, in the seasons since, about why the Empire was so wrong, and what it was that it never understood about the Terrans, until the understanding arrived, folding out of the dark with 30 ships and an unbreakable calm. The Empire's models had sorted young species into simple shapes, and the shapes were almost always right, and the Terrans had broken every one of them. And for a long time I believed the thing the Empire could not see was their speed, the terrifying quickness with which they learned, the way Grace Holloway had taken an age of secret and solved it in 2 minutes because she assumed it could be solved. That was part of it. The Empire was old, and old things stop looking for the flaws in what already works, and the Terrans looked at everything as though it might be broken, and so they always found the place where it was, and a people like that cannot be defeated by a clever trick, because to them, every trick is simply a new problem, and new problems are the thing they love best. But I have come to believe, in the long work of holding the seam, that the speed was not the deepest thing. The deepest thing was the one Captain Sutton named in her cold cell, the thing the Empire's models had no column for at all. We count us, she said. We count for each other. The Empire had built its whole strength on numbers, on the idea that enough was always enough, on the cold arithmetic of a power that could always bring more ships than its enemy. And the Terrans had built their strength on something the Empire's arithmetic could not even measure, a loyalty so total that a few small people in a few small cells were worth crossing the whole dark to bring home. The Empire counted the Terrans and found them small. The Terrans counted for each other and found themselves without limit. And one of those is a strength that breaks the moment it meets a thing it cannot divide, and the other is a strength that grows the more it is tested. And on the day the two strengths finally met at the edge of the quiet reach, the cold arithmetic of an age came apart against a loyalty it could not even understand. And there was one more thing, the thing I think of most of all, the thing that I believe will matter more than any of the rest as the long ages go on. The Terrans could have destroyed us. I want to be very clear about that, because it is the center of everything. They unmade a strike in flight as easily as catching a stone. They took a ship without harming a single being aboard. They solved our deepest secret in 2 minutes. They surrounded 100 of our hulls with 30 of theirs, and made our numbers meaningless. On that day, at the edge of the quiet reach, the Terrans held the power to end the frontier fleet, the station, perhaps a great deal more, and not one of us could have stopped them, and they chose not to. Again and again, at every point where an empire would have struck, they chose not to. They came for their people, and they took them, and they harmed no one, not even Overseer Town, who had tried to harm them, whom Oliver Bennett simply held still and told that it was over. The Empire had spent an age believing that strength meant the willingness to break what stood in your way. And the Terrans showed us, without ever saying it aloud, that the truest strength is the one that holds the power to break, and chooses, instead, to build. That is the thing the Empire never understood, and the thing it learned, at last, the hard way, the only way it had ever been willing to learn anything. The Terrans were not more brutal than us. They were stronger, and faster, and more loyal, and more terrifying in every way that mattered. And they were also, when it counted, more merciful. And it was the mercy, in the end, that humbled us most of all. You can stand against a power that wishes to destroy you. There is a strange comfort in it. There is no standing against a power that could destroy you, and chooses, instead, to offer you its hand. Overseer Taln faced his reckoning, and the Empire did not hide it. He had taken a study ship out of pride, and ignored a warning out of pride, and fired the first shot out of pride, and lost the Empire's deepest secret out of pride, and tried, at the very end, to turn a reunion into a catastrophe out of pride. The council that had once shielded its overseers turned its full weight against him, because the council had learned, at last, what pride cost, and it did not wish to pay that cost again. Taln was stripped of every rank and every honor, and confined, and his name became, across the Empire, a word that beings used when they meant the kind of certainty that ruins everything it touches. I did not take pleasure in it. I had warned against the thing he became, and being right about it brought me no joy, only a quiet sorrow that an empire had needed his ruin to finally see what I had seen all along. High Marshal Edrock became, to my lasting surprise, one of the strongest voices for the new peace. He had gathered the fleet, and he had watched it become meaningless, and the experience had burned something out of him and left something better in its place. He had learned in a single day the thing he had refused to learn in a long career of never losing, that strength is not the same as wisdom, and that the willingness to stand down when standing down is harder than fighting is its own kind of courage. He spoke for the peace in the council, against the proud ones who clung to the old certainty, and his word carried weight precisely because he was a marshal who had never lost and had still chosen to kneel rather than break a galaxy over a point of honor. He and Admiral Pierce, of the Terran Union, became in time something close to friends, two old soldiers who had nearly led their peoples into ruin, and had instead, together, built the thing that kept the ruin from coming. I do not think anyone who had stood in the Great Hall on that first morning, watching Edrock call a planet-breaking threat a small problem, would have believed it. But that is the thing about the Terrans. They do not only change the beings who fight them, they change the beings who learn from them, and the learning, once it starts, does not stop. And the galaxy noticed. This is the part that matters most for what comes after, and so I will say it plainly. The Imperium was the oldest and the greatest power in the dark, and on a single day at the edge of the quiet reach, a young species that the Empire had filed under harmless, folded out of nowhere, and humbled it without firing a shot, and then, having humbled it, chose to build a peace with it instead of breaking it. The other powers of the dark, the ones who had spent an age measuring themselves against the Empire and finding themselves smaller, watched all of it. They watched the fleet become meaningless. They watched the secret fall in 2 minutes. They watched the Empire write down, for the first time in its long history, that it had been wrong. And they understood, every one of them, that the order of the dark had changed, that there was a new power among them now, a power that could not be ruled, and could not be tricked, and could not be outcounted, a power that came for its own, across any distance and harmed no one it did not have to, and chose, when it held the strength to break, to build instead. Word of it spread the way word of such things always spreads, faster than any ship, leaping from world to world ahead of any official telling. And the word that spread was not a word of conquest, because the Terrans had conquered nothing. It was a word of warning, and of wonder, and it carried, in the mouths of 100 frightened and fascinated species, a single simple shape. The Terrans are coming, the word said, not coming to rule, not coming to take, but coming, out into the open dark, no longer few, and no longer far away, and no longer small, a people who count for one another without limit, and learn without end, and choose mercy when they could choose ruin. Leave their own alone, the word said, or they will cross the whole dark to bring them home, and you will not be able to stop them, and the only mercy you will receive is the mercy they decide to give. The Empire ignored the warning, the word said. Do not make the same mistake. The Terrans are coming. Decide now whether you will meet them as a neighbor or as the next empire that learns the hard way. I have heard that word in 100 forms now, in my long work of holding the seam, and I will tell you a secret that I have learned, the kind of secret that the listening halls were never built to hear. The word is true, and it should frighten the proud, and it should comfort the wise. And the difference between the two, the only difference that has ever mattered in any of this, is whether you can do what my empire could not. Whether you can look at a small thing at the edge of your map and not decide that it is small, whether you can read a warning and believe it, whether you can choose, when you hold the strength to break, to build instead. The Terrans are coming. That is not a threat. It is a question, asked of every old power in the dark, and the question is the same question the hierarch asked in the great meeting, the same question Eleanor Crane answered with an offered hand. Can you learn to share a galaxy with a people you cannot rule? The Empire learned it the hard way, and survived, barely, and is better now than it has ever been. I hope, for the sake of everyone, that the others learn it the easy way. But I have read enough history, of my people and of theirs, to know that the easy way is rarely the way that gets taken. I saw Eleanor Crane many times in the seasons that followed, in the long work of building the peace, and each time I understood her a little better, and each time I was a little more glad of the strange path that had carried me from the listening halls to her side. She was not, in the end, a conqueror, and she was not, in the end, even a soldier, though she had done the work of one when the work was needed. She was a being who valued her people without limit, and who had crossed the whole dark to prove it, and who had then, having proven it, chosen to spend the rest of her days building a peace rather than collecting a victory. The last time we spoke at length, she said a thing to me that I have made the center of my work, the thing I repeat to every proud council and every frightened world that asks me what the Terrans truly are. People keep asking me, she said, why we did not take more, when we could have taken everything. The Empire was open to us. We could have remade the Order of the Dark in an afternoon. And I tell them the truth, which is that we never wanted the Order of the Dark. We wanted our people back, and we wanted to be left alone to be ourselves, and we wanted to know that the next time someone looked at us and saw something small, they would remember what happened to the last power that made that mistake. That is all. We are not coming to rule anyone, Vren. We never were. We are only coming to be seen clearly, and to bring our own home, and to offer our hand to anyone wise enough to take it. The Empire thought we were a danger to be managed. We were only ever a people who refused to be unseen. And the thing your Empire never understood, the thing the whole dark is only now beginning to learn, is that a people who refuse to be unseen, and who count for one another without limit, and who choose mercy when they could choose ruin, cannot be ruled, and cannot be stopped, and do not, in the end, want to rule or stop anyone else. We just want to be home, and to be free, and to be left to become whatever we are becoming. Help them see that, Vren. You are the only one who can. You saw it first. You saw it when no one else would. Help the rest of them see it before they have to learn it the way your Empire did. I have spent every season since trying to do exactly that. I am Vren, of the listening halls that no longer feel like home, and of two peoples that both, somehow, do. I wrote a warning that no one read, and the warning came true. And the coming true carried me to the center of the largest moment in the long history of the dark, and I have held the seam of it together ever since with my own two hands, the same hands that tore a feed loose in a cold corridor to keep a reunion from becoming a ruin. I have watched an empire that was certain for an age learn, at terrible cost, to be wise. I have watched a young species that the Empire filed under harmless, become the power that changed the order of the dark, not by taking, but by refusing to be taken, not by ruling, but by being undeniably, brilliantly, stubbornly itself. And I have learned, in all of it, the one lesson that I would carry to every world in the galaxy if I could, the lesson the Empire paid so much to learn, and that I would give to anyone for free. Do not decide that the small thing at the edge of your map is small. Read the warning, and believe it. And when you meet a people who count for one another without limit, who learn without end, who hold the strength to break and choose, instead, to build, do not reach for the clever way out, because there is no clever way out. There is only the choice between a good ending and a worse one, and the good ending begins the moment you stop being proud and start being wise. The Terrans came. They came for their own, and they brought them home, and they harmed no one they did not have to, and then they offered the oldest power in the dark their hand. The Empire, after an age of certainty, was wise enough, at last, to take it. And out in the open dark, beyond the quiet reach, on a warm blue world that no one will ever again file under harmless, a people who refuse to be unseen, go on becoming whatever it is they are becoming, free and home and undeniable. And the rest of us, old powers and young, wise and proud alike, will spend the long ages to come learning the thing my empire learned the hard way, and that I, an analyst from the listening halls who only ever tried to do the right thing, was somehow the first to see. They are coming, they were always coming. And the only question that has ever mattered, the question the hierarch asked and Eleanor Crane answered with an open hand, is the one each of us must answer for ourselves, when the day comes that the Terrans fold out of our own dark and ask us, with terrible patience, to see them clearly at last. I know which answer I would give. I gave it in a cold corridor, with my hands burning, and I have never once regretted it. I hope, when your day comes, that you give it too.